In 2002, to celebrate then Nobel laureate Milton Friedman's 98th birthday, future Nobel laureate Ben Bernanke gave a speech, which he ended with a surprising admission of guilt for someone working at the Federal Reserve. I would like to say to Milton and Anna, regarding the Great Depression, you're right, we did it, we're very sorry, but thanks to you, we won't do it again. And then they did it again. This is the story of how it happened. As you probably know from your history books, 1929 marks the start of the Great Depression, an economic catastrophe which affected the world for a decade and possibly facilitated the start of World War II. Though economists long debated the exact cause of the depression, Bernanke's speech saw the Fed admit that it was pretty much their fault. Federal Reserve officials, thinking that stock market speculation had sent equity prices too high, started raising interest rates. Their goal was to essentially pop a supposed bubble on the stock market. The real effect was a large and sustained drop in the money supply. As people's incomes dropped, they spent less money, meaning that firms took in less revenue as well. As a result, because of a little concept we call sticky wages, the idea that wage reductions are even more unpopular than layoffs, firms began to fire workers. Unemployment rose, incomes dropped further, and the cycle continued until unemployment hit a whopping 24.9%. And though the end factors of the Great Depression are also debated, the de facto consensus among economists was formed by Christina Romer in 1991, who argued that a reversal of previous Fed policy, characterized by a large and sustained expansion in the money supply, is what allowed the US to recover. The author admits that higher spending also played a role, but uses simulations to show that monetary factors were of primary importance for the recovery. Bernanke, being a monetary economist who specialized in the Great Depression, understood all of this. In fact, when Japan entered a slump in the 1990s, Bernanke wrote a piece explaining that Japan had a case of self-induced paralysis, which could easily be fixed if they just printed more money. So, naturally, Bernanke was the best possible person for Fed chairman when a similar crisis hit the United States. There was no way he would miss this. Shit. Alright, flashback to 2006. Bernanke becomes Federal Reserve Chairman. The US is coming out of the so-called Great Moderation, wherein Alan Greenspan basically supervised a period of low inflation without a significant economic crisis. I say significant because there was the case of the dot-com crash, but it didn't really matter that much. Bernanke was in the midst of an interesting situation. Since the start of the century, home prices had been rising incredibly rapidly. The Case-Shiller Index, which, measured home prices, was at an all-time high, with the Shiller from the Case-Shiller Index declaring that we were in the midst of a bubble. Bernanke, having given a speech just 4 years prior about it being a terrible, even a ghastly idea for central bankers to try and identify bubbles and pop them, would obviously never try to do anything about housing prices. Oh dear lord. Okay, so yeah, Bernanke and other Fed members basically thought that housing prices were higher than they should be, so they engaged in a policy of raising interest rates so that housing prices would fall. And they did. And then they fell some more. And Bernanke claimed there was nothing wrong. And then Bear Stearns collapsed, and Lehman Brothers collapsed, and AIG had to get bailed out, and all hell broke loose by end of year. The Fed did it again. Now, to be fair, Bernanke tried a lot at the Fed during the Great Recession. If you don't know, he launched a program of quantitative easing, meaning that he basically brought out the money printer like Papa Friedman would approve of. But all things considered, it was too little too late. As unemployment soared high, inflation remained below the 2% target. And we just never really recovered. If you look at the trend line of US real GDP, it's obvious that we never got back to the growth path we would expect before 2008. It took until 2016 for unemployment to drop to the levels seen in 2007. If the Great Depression was, as Bernanke himself said, proof for the idea that monetary forces, particularly if unleashed in a destabilizing direction, can be extremely powerful, the 2008 financial crisis teaches us a different lesson. Sometimes the perfect person for the job is not good enough. Everything about Bernanke pointed to his ability to not repeat the mistakes of the Great Depression. He thought that monetary policy could help stimulate the economy during a crisis. Check. He thought that allowing large financial firms such as banks or Lehman Brothers to fail would exacerbate the crisis. Check. Hell, he got a Nobel Prize for the paper he wrote on this. Double check. He thought the Fed shouldn't try to pop speculative bubbles as it did during the period before the Depression. Check. Yet, his attempts at monetary stimulus failed. He allowed Lehman to collapse and he raised rates to cool the housing bubble. And side note, this may not actually have been a bubble, but that's a video for another time. I end this on a somewhat pessimistic note. How do we trust our central bankers if the perfect person for the job can perform the simple function of just print more money? The sophisticated listener will point to liquidity traps, institutional constraints, and risks of inflation. But I can't stop but imagine a world where neither the Depression nor the 2008 recession happened, and we were not forced to withstand their disastrous long term effects.